After moving into her millionaire son's mansion, an elderly woman believes she is surrounded by love and peace. But everything falls apart when she uncovers a dark secret and is taken to a remote estate, where her daughter-in-law tries to bury her alive. Yet an unexpected act of bravery turns what should have been the end into a new beginning for the whole family. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The fine March rain was falling over Greenwich, Connecticut, when Eleanor stepped through the electronic gate of the mansion for the first time. She firmly gripped the handle of her worn leather purse, the same one she had carried for over 20 years, and observed the vastness of the garden before her with teary eyes. At 72, she had never imagined she would live in a place like this. The cobblestone path led to the main entrance, flanked by majestic oak trees that swayed gently in the wind. Everything there breathed success, achievement, a life she herself had helped build with her own calloused hands. Edward came down the marble staircase with a wide smile on his face. He was a man of 45, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair starting to grey at the temples. He wore a light blue dress shirt and tailored trousers. Even after so many years at the helm of his tech company, he maintained that simple way of hugging, that genuine affection that had never forgotten his humble origins. When he wrapped his mother in his arms, Eleanor smelled her son's expensive cologne mixed with the scent of rain and allowed herself to cry softly. So many years alone in that cramped apartment in Queens. So many sleepless nights waiting for her son to come back from night classes, then from college, then from the endless meetings that built his empire. She never complained. She had taken in laundry, sewn party dresses, and cleaned 3 different houses so that Edward could study. And now, after everything, he had come to get her to live with him, with the family he had built. The house was even more impressive inside. The marble floor reflected the light from the crystal chandeliers that hung from the high ceiling. Modern paintings decorated the white walls, and the living room seemed larger than the entire apartment where Eleanor had lived for decades. She walked slowly, still dazed by the sudden change in her life. Edward held her suitcase, while he excitedly explained about each room, each detail he had ordered, prepared especially for her. That's when she heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Eleanor looked up and saw Vivian for the first time. Edward's wife was a woman of impeccable beauty, probably in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair that fell in waves over her shoulders. She wore a grey midi dress that flattered her elegant figure and heels that echoed on the marble with every step. But it was her gaze that caught the elderly woman's attention. Vivian had light green eyes that seemed to assess everything around her with a calculated coldness. "Good morning, Eleanor. Edward has told me so much about you. Welcome to our home." Vivian's voice sounded polite, but there was something in it that didn't match the perfect smile on her face. Eleanor extended her hand, but Vivian just tilted her head slightly, keeping her hands clasped in front of her. "Where's Lucas?" Edward looked around for his son. Eleanor felt her heart ache with curiosity. She hadn't seen her grandson in person for years, only through quick video calls and photos Edward sent on his phone. The boy was 7 now, and she barely knew this child who was her only grandchild. "He's in his room, focused on his building blocks. You know how he gets when he's focused on something," Vivian replied with an almost imperceptible sigh, as if talking about her own son was a burden. "Better not to interrupt him now, maybe later." Edward didn't seem to notice his wife's tone. "Then I'll show you to your room, Mom. I prepared everything with care. It's on the 2nd floor with a view of the garden. I know you've always loved plants." Eleanor climbed the stairs, holding onto the mahogany banister, feeling the weight of her age and her emotions. The room prepared for her was spacious and airy. A king-size bed with a white quilt and embroidered pillows occupied the center. There was a reading armchair near the window. An antique desk she recognized from the time when Edward was still a child, studying in the cramped living room of their apartment, and an entire closet just for her few clothes. She approached the window and saw the garden below with its well-tended rose bushes and the children's swing set in the background. "Thank you, my son. This is more than I ever dreamed of." Eleanor's voice was choked with emotion. Edward hugged his mother again, with that silent strength of someone who carries deep gratitude. You deserve all this and more, Mom. Everything I have today is because you never gave up on me. Now I want you to rest, to enjoy life, to get to know Lucas better. He's a special child, and I know you two will get along great." That first night, Eleanor dined at the enormous table in the dining room. Edward talked animatedly about business, about the company's expansion into the international market, about future projects. Vivian remained silent most of the time, delicately cutting her grilled salmon and taking small sips of white wine. Lucas had not appeared for dinner. According to Vivian, the boy preferred to eat in his room when he was tired. Eleanor noticed that Vivian rarely looked at Edward when he spoke. Her eyes wandered around the room, to the phone she kept next to her plate, to her perfectly manicured red nails. There was a palpable distance between the couple, as if they each lived in parallel dimensions within that enormous mansion. After dinner, when Edward went to his office to handle some pending matters, Eleanor decided to go up to the bedroom floor. She walked slowly down the hallway lit by discreet sconces until she reached a slightly ajar door. Soft light spilled into the hallway. She gently pushed the door open and saw Lucas's room for the first time. It was a universe unto itself. The walls were painted light blue and covered with shelves full of books, building blocks and dinosaur miniatures, perfectly organized by size and color. A children's tent occupied one corner of the room, with pillows and a lamp inside. And there, sitting on the plush rug, was Lucas. The boy had straight, light brown hair, large, expressive brown eyes, and wore pajamas with a planet print. He was so focused on building a complex structure with blocks that he didn't even notice his grandmother's presence. Eleanor watched in silence, moved to finally see up close this child she loved so much from a distance. "Hi, Lucas," she said softly, so as not to startle him. "I'm your Grandma Eleanor. May I come in?" The boy slowly raised his eyes, as if returning from a deep trance. He watched her for a few seconds, processing the information, and then a shy smile appeared on his face. "Did Grandma come to live here with us?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I did, my love. And I'm so happy to be close to you." Eleanor entered the room and sat with difficulty on the rug, next to her grandson. "What are you building?" Lucas began to explain every detail of the structure with a contained excitement. He talked about the symmetry of the pieces, the colors he had chosen for each floor, about how it would be a futuristic building when he finished. Eleanor listened in awe. There was something special about this child, a different kind of intelligence, a keen sensitivity that picked up on details others wouldn't see. The following days brought a new routine for Eleanor. She would wake up early, prepare breakfast for Edward before he left for work, and then spend her time around the house trying to understand her new reality. Vivian rarely appeared in the early hours of the day. When she did, she was already impeccably dressed and made up, usually heading out to the gym, to lunches with friends, or to appointments she never detailed. Lucas spent his mornings with a private tutor who came to the house. Eleanor discovered that the boy did not attend a regular school. According to Edward, Lucas had some learning particularities, a different way of processing information, and therefore studied at home with specialized support. He was brilliant in math and science, but had difficulty with loud noises and overstimulating environments. It was on a Thursday afternoon, after the tutor had left, that Eleanor and Lucas began to build their own ritual. She was in the kitchen preparing a cornbread cake, following the recipe she had memorized for decades, when the boy appeared at the door with curious eyes. "What's Grandma doing?" "A cornbread cake with a jam swirl. Have you ever had it?" Eleanor smiled at her grandson. "I don't know, I don't think so." Lucas approached the counter and observed the aligned ingredients. He reached out to touch each one, feeling the texture of the cornmeal, the weight of the eggs, the sweet smell of the jam. "Want to help me? I promise it'll be fun." Eleanor noticed the boy's interest and felt her heart warm. "Can I?" Lucas asked with shy excitement. "Mummy doesn't like me messing around in the kitchen. She says I make a mess. Here with Grandma you can. We can clean up the mess later. The important thing is to have fun." She handed him a small apron she had found in a drawer. As they mixed the ingredients, cracked eggs, and measured the cornmeal, Eleanor told stories of Edward's childhood, how he also loved to help in the kitchen when he was little, how he once dropped an entire bag of flour on the floor, and they laughed until their bellies ached while they cleaned it up together. Lucas listened to every word with deep attention, as if recording everything in his memory. "Was Daddy like me when he was little?" the boy asked as he stirred the batter with a wooden spoon almost bigger than him. "He was. Very curious, very smart, and he also liked things his own way." Eleanor stroked her grandson's hair affectionately. "And look how he grew up to be a wonderful man." While the cake baked, filling the kitchen with that homemade aroma of childhood and affection, Lucas showed his grandmother his favorite books. He had an impressive collection on dinosaurs, planets, and ancient structures. He spoke about each topic with an expertise that was impressive for his age, but always with that delicate manner of someone who fears being interrupted or judged. It was at that moment that Vivian entered the kitchen. She was wearing expensive brand-name workout clothes and holding a bottle of mineral water. Her gaze swept over the scene, the mess on the counter, the boy with the batter-stained apron, Eleanor with flour on her apron and face, and something in her expression changed. An almost imperceptible shadow crossed her green eyes. "Lucas, you should be resting. You have a session with the therapist tomorrow." Vivian's voice sounded firm and cold. "But, Mommy, I'm making a cake with Grandma." The boy held the wooden spoon tighter, as if defending that moment. "I know, dear, but you need to stick to your routine. Go up to your room and have your juice." Vivian pointed to the door with an imperative gesture. Lucas looked at Eleanor with deep sadness in his eyes. The grandmother perceived her grandson's disappointment and felt a pang in her chest, but she didn't want to create conflict in her first clash with her daughter-in-law. "Go on, my love. We'll finish our conversation tomorrow. The cake will be ready soon, and I'll bring a piece up for you." Eleanor tried to soften the moment. The boy nodded and left the kitchen with his head down, dragging his feet on the porcelain floor. When they were alone, Vivian poured herself some water and leaned against the counter with a studied posture. "Eleanor, I understand that you want to bond with Lucas, but he has a very specific routine. He can't have too many stimuli or sudden changes. It hinders his development." The daughter-in-law spoke with an artificial calm, as if explaining something obvious to someone without understanding. "I was just making a cake with my grandson. I don't see the problem with that," Eleanor replied with the tranquility of someone who has lived a long time and learned not to be easily intimidated. "Of course there's no problem," Vivian forced a smile. "I'm just saying that from now on, it would be better to consult me before planning activities with him. I know my son's needs." There was something in the way Vivian pronounced "my son" that sounded almost possessive, exclusive. Eleanor felt a growing discomfort in her chest, but decided not to prolong the argument. Vivian left the kitchen with quick steps, leaving a trail of expensive perfume mixed with a palpable tension in the air. In the following days, Eleanor began to observe the dynamics of that house more closely. Edward left early and came back late, completely immersed in his business. When he was home, he tried to compensate for his absence by giving attention to his son, but Lucas always seemed withdrawn around his father, as if afraid of disappointing him. Vivian maintained a cold distance from her husband and son. She moved through the house like an elegant ghost, always busy with her own affairs, rarely showing affection or genuine interest in Lucas. What bothered Eleanor the most was the way Vivian looked at her own son. There was no warmth in that gaze. There was something close to obligation, tolerance, but never the unconditional love a mother should have. She noticed how Vivian got annoyed when Lucas talked too much about his interests, how she would turn her body away when the boy tried to get close, how she sighed impatiently when he took too long to do something. One afternoon, while Lucas was drawing dinosaurs on the porch and Eleanor was knitting in a nearby armchair, she heard voices coming from the garden. Edward and Vivian were talking near the rose bushes. The elderly woman had no intention of eavesdropping, but something in the tone of the argument caught her attention. "You work too much, Edward. You barely have time for your family." Vivian's voice sounded accusatory. "I work to give you the best life, so that you and Lucas lack for nothing," Edward replied with evident weariness. "But what's the use of all this if you're not present?" "The boy hardly knows you," Vivian continued, but there was something rehearsed in her words, as if they were spoken more out of social obligation than real feeling. "I'm doing the best I can. And now with my mother here, she can give Lucas more attention. I've always wanted them to get closer." Edward tried to steer the conversation. "Your mother," Vivian repeated with a tone that Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't contempt. It was something more complex. "She's a good person, but she doesn't understand what it's like to deal with a child like Lucas." Eleanor felt a pang of indignation. What right did Vivian have to say she didn't understand her own grandson? But she decided to remain calm and continue knitting, as if she hadn't heard anything. That night, when she went to take a glass of warm milk to Lucas before bed, she found the boy sitting on the bed with a notebook in his lap. He was drawing with colored pencils, concentrated. "What are you drawing, my love?" Eleanor placed the glass on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm drawing Grandma making a cake." Lucas turned the notebook to show her. In the drawing, two figures stood side by side in a colorful kitchen, one shorter and one taller, both smiling. "It's beautiful." Eleanor felt her eyes well up. "Can I keep this drawing?" "Of course, it's for Grandma." Lucas handed her the sheet with shy pride. "Grandma, can I ask you a question?" "You can, my dear. You can ask me anything." "Why doesn't Mommy like to play with me?" Lucas asked the question with a painful naturalness, as if he had already accepted that reality. Eleanor felt her heart clench. How could she explain to a child something she didn't understand herself? "Oh, my love, your mother loves you very much. It's just that sometimes adults have a lot of worries, a lot of things on their minds, and they end up getting distracted. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." She tried to soften it to protect her grandson from that painful truth. "But she never plays with me or hugs me. She only tells me what I have to do." Lucas spoke without resentment, just stating facts. "With Grandma it's different. Grandma smiles for real when she's with me." Eleanor hugged her grandson with all the strength her tired arms could muster. "And I will always smile when I'm with you. You can be sure of that. Now let's get to sleep. Tomorrow is another day, and I want to teach you how to make homemade bread. What do you think?" Lucas's eyes lit up. "Really? I love bread." "Really? It'll be our special activity." Eleanor kissed her grandson's forehead and tucked him in with the comforter. "Dream of good things, my angel." As she left the room and walked down the silent hallway to her own room, Eleanor carried with her an unease she couldn't name. There was something wrong in that beautiful, large house, something that went beyond Vivian's coldness or Edward's distance. It was as if they were all living a carefully crafted performance, but one that could crumble at any moment, revealing uncomfortable truths. She lay down on the king-size bed and looked at the ceiling. The moonlight streamed through the window, drawing shadows on the white walls. She thought of the drawing Lucas had made, of those two figures smiling together in a kitchen. She thought of the boy's sad eyes when he asked why his mother didn't play with him. She thought of Vivian and that calculated distance she kept from everyone and everything. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but that unease was just the beginning. In the coming days, she would begin to notice small details that didn't fit. Stray phrases that made no sense, glances that hid more than they revealed. And when the truth began to emerge from the shadows of that perfect mansion, nothing would ever be the same again. She pulled the comforter up to her chin and closed her eyes, trying to push away the disturbing thoughts. But sleep was slow to come. Outside, the city of New York continued to pulse with its infinite energy, indifferent to the silent dramas unfolding behind the high walls of the mansions in Greenwich. The following weeks brought a comforting routine for Eleanor. Every morning after Edward left for work, she and Lucas would meet in the kitchen. It was their sacred time, that ritual of preparing bread, cakes, and cookies while they talked about dinosaurs, stars, and all the curiosities that inhabited the boy's brilliant mind. Lucas blossomed in these encounters. His smile became looser, his voice less hesitant, and little by little he revealed to his grandmother an entire universe of dreams and fears that he kept only for himself. Eleanor discovered that her grandson had an impressive memory. He remembered dates, numbers, complex sequences of information with an unsettling ease. He also noticed details that others wouldn't, like when she changed her hairstyle or wore a different shade of lipstick. Lucas had a unique way of seeing the world, and his grandmother learned every day to navigate that particular universe with delicacy and respect. But the more time she spent in that house, the more Eleanor noticed things that deeply bothered her. Vivian rarely interacted with Lucas spontaneously. When she needed to address her son, she used a mechanical, almost formal tone, as if fulfilling a social obligation. There were no morning hugs, no good night, kisses, none of those moments of complicity that should naturally exist between a mother and son. Edward, for his part, seemed oblivious to it all. He would arrive exhausted from work, eat a quick dinner, spend a few minutes with Lucas before the boy went to sleep, and then lock himself in his office until late at night. On weekends, he often traveled for business meetings in other cities. It was as if he were running away from his own home, or perhaps from a marital reality he preferred not to face. One Tuesday afternoon changed everything. The day had started hot and humid, typical of a New York summer that insisted on extending into autumn. Eleanor and Lucas had spent the morning preparing a key lime pie. The boy was especially excited because he had managed to make the crust without it breaking, following all of his grandmother's instructions with meticulous precision. They put the pie in the oven, and Lucas asked to get a new book Edward had bought about the solar system. While her grandson went up to his room, Eleanor decided to water the orchids on the veranda. Vivian had an impressive collection of rare orchids that were kept in a covered area on the side of the house. They were delicate flowers that required specific care, and the elderly woman had offered to help with their maintenance. She picked up the watering can and walked to the veranda, enjoying the gentle breeze coming from the garden. That's when she heard Vivian's voice. She was in the garden near the jasmine-covered arbor, talking on the phone. Her tone was different from usual, more tense, almost desperate. Eleanor had no intention of eavesdropping, but something in that conversation made her pause. "I know it's difficult, but you have to be patient," Vivian said in a low voice, but the afternoon silence carried her words to the veranda. "I can't just tell him the truth now. Do you think Edward is just going to accept finding out that the son he's raised for 7 years isn't his?" Eleanor felt her heart race. She slowly approached the railing that separated the veranda from the garden, hiding behind a vine-covered column. She couldn't have heard correctly. It wasn't possible. "Of course I love Lucas," Vivian continued, and there was a growing irritation in her voice, "but this isn't how things were supposed to be. I had no choice. If I hadn't faked the pregnancy, Edward would never have married me. You know very well how traditional he is, how conservative his family is. He wanted to be a father, he wanted to start a family, and I gave him that." Silence. Vivian listened to someone on the other end of the line. "The tests, all forged, my love. You know I have connections. I managed to fake every ultrasound, every blood result, and when the time came, I pretended to go into labor, went to that private clinic, you know, and there was the baby I had gotten through that lawyer. A completely informal adoption, without any official records. The biological mother was a 17-year-old girl who couldn't afford to raise the child." Eleanor felt her legs give way. She leaned on the iron railing, trying to process what she had just heard. Lucas was not Edward's biological son. Vivian had faked an entire pregnancy, forged medical exams, and carried out an illegal adoption, all to maintain her marriage, her luxurious life, her social position. "No, no one will ever find out." Vivian laughed now, a nervous, humorless laugh. "Edward is so busy with the company he barely pays attention to his son. And even if he did, how would he suspect? Lucas happens to have some similar features by pure coincidence. And the boy's different way, I've always attributed it to neurological issues. Everyone believed it." More silence. Eleanor felt nauseous. She needed to get out of there, needed to process this devastating information, but her legs wouldn't obey. "You have to trust me," Vivian said firmly. "In a few years, when Lucas is older and doesn't depend on me so much, I can start planning our exit. But not now. Now I need to keep up appearances. I need Edward to keep supporting me while I save enough money for us to start over. Just a little more patience." The call ended. Eleanor saw Vivian put her phone in the designer bag she was carrying and walk back into the house. She waited a few minutes, trying to control her rapid breathing, trying to organize the thoughts that were spinning chaotically in her head. When she finally managed to move, she went back inside with trembling steps. Lucas was in the living room, flipping through the book about the solar system. When he saw his grandmother, his face lit up. "Grandma, did you know that Jupiter has 79 moons?" the boy said excitedly, oblivious to his grandmother's emotional turmoil. Eleanor forced a smile. "I didn't know that, my love. How incredible!" She sat down next to her grandson, trying to appear normal, but her hands were trembling slightly. "Is Grandma okay?" Lucas noticed, as he always noticed everything. "Your hands are cold." "I'm fine, dear. I was just in the sun for a bit and now I'm feeling a little dizzy. Nothing a glass of water won't fix." She gently stroked the boy's hair. Lucas watched her with those deep, intelligent eyes, as if he could read beyond her words. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying every word she had heard. What should she do? Tell Edward and destroy his family? Keep the secret and become an accomplice to this farce? And Lucas, that sweet, sensitive boy who had finally found a safe harbor with her, what would become of him if the truth came out? She thought of all the pain Edward had already faced in his life, the financial difficulties of his childhood, the sleepless nights studying and working, the struggle to build his empire. He was a good man who genuinely loved his son. Discovering that everything had been a lie from the beginning could destroy him. But at the same time, he didn't deserve to live in a lie. He didn't deserve to be married to a woman who had manipulated him so calculatingly. And Lucas deserved to know his true origin, deserved to have access to his real story. The following days were torturous for Eleanor. She tried to maintain her normal routine with Lucas, but every time she looked at her grandson, she saw the pieces of a puzzle that were finally fitting together. His different way, which Vivian had always attributed to neurological issues, could simply be the unique personality of a child whose biological origins were unknown. Vivian's lack of emotional bond made sense now. She had never carried that child, never felt his movements inside her, never gone through the physical and emotional transformations of a real pregnancy. Vivian, for her part, didn't seem to have noticed that her mother-in-law knew something. She continued her usual routine, going out for social engagements, talking on the phone in low tones when she thought she was alone, maintaining that cold distance from everyone and everything. But Eleanor began to watch her with different eyes. She now saw the artificiality in every gesture, the calculated coldness in every word directed at Lucas, the genuine disinterest in the boy's well-being. It was a week after the discovery that things began to change more evidently. Eleanor was in the kitchen with Lucas, teaching him how to make cheese rolls when Vivian entered with a different expression. There was something in her eyes, a suspicion, a tension that wasn't there before. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you," Vivian said in a tone that tried to sound casual but failed miserably. "Of course. Shall we go to the living room?" Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, trying to stay calm. "Here is fine. Lucas, go up to your room," Vivian ordered without looking at her son. "But Mommy, the cheese rolls aren't finished yet," the boy protested. "Now, Lucas," Vivian raised her voice, and the tone made the boy shrink back. "Go on, my love, we'll finish later." Eleanor tried to soften the moment. Lucas left the kitchen with his head down, dragging his feet. When they were alone, Vivian approached the counter, her green eyes fixed on her mother-in-law's tired ones. "You've been very close to Lucas, more than I'd like," Vivian began, measuring each word. "I've already told you he has a specific routine that he can't have too many stimuli." "Making cheese rolls isn't too much stimulation, Vivian. It's just a grandmother spending time with her grandson," Eleanor replied, her voice firm. "Yes, I know what it is," Vivian crossed her arms, "but I think it's best you know your limits. This is my house and Lucas is my son. I decide what's best for him." There was something in Vivian's words that sounded like a threat. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Could her daughter-in-law suspect that she knew the secret? "I've never questioned your authority, Vivian. I just want to be close to my grandson." Eleanor tried to deflect the direct confrontation. "Then just stay close, not so deep inside his life." Vivian turned her back and left the kitchen, leaving a heavy silence in the air. That night, Edward came home from work early. He looked tired, but excited at the same time. During dinner, he made an announcement that took everyone by surprise. "Everyone, I have an idea. How about we spend a weekend at the country estate? It's been so long since we've been there. Lucas would love to see the animals, breathe some fresh air. And you too, Mum. You'll enjoy getting out of the city for a bit." Edward looked at his family expectantly. The estate. Vivian seemed surprised for the first time in a long while. "But that place is abandoned, Edward. I don't even know if it's in any condition." "The caretaker handles everything. I called him last week and it's all fine. We just need to pack our bags and go. We can go this weekend," Edward insisted. Eleanor watched Vivian's reaction. Her daughter-in-law had turned pale, and her hands were gripping her napkin with excessive force. There was fear in those green eyes, a real and palpable fear. "I don't think it's a good idea. Lucas might be uncomfortable in a new environment," Vivian argued, but her voice sounded shaky. "Lucas needs to get out more, see different places. He can't live locked up in this house forever," Edward replied with unusual firmness. "It's decided. We're going on Saturday." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep again. Something about that conversation about the estate bothered her deeply. Vivian's reaction had been strange, almost desperate, and the more she thought about it, the more a bad feeling grew in her chest. The next morning, when she went to the bathroom, she found her phone on the sink with a message notification from an unknown number. She opened it curiously and felt her blood run cold as she read the words on the screen. "She knows that you know, don't go to the estate." Eleanor reread the message several times, trying to understand. Who had sent it? How did someone know she had discovered Vivian's secret? And why were they warning her about the estate? She spent the rest of the day on high alert. She watched Vivian discreetly, trying to catch any sign that her daughter-in-law really suspected something. And the more she watched, the more she saw the signs. Vivian avoided her, averted her gaze when their eyes met, kept conversations short and formal. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. In the following nights, Eleanor heard strange movements, footsteps in the hallway in the middle of the night, doors opening and closing carefully, whispers coming from downstairs. She even went down once and saw a light on in Edward's office. But as she approached, the light quickly went out. Was it Vivian messing with something, planning something? On Thursday, 2 days before the trip to the estate, Eleanor witnessed another scene that disturbed her. She was putting away clothes in her closet when she heard Vivian on the phone again. Her daughter-in-law was in the next room, probably thinking she was alone upstairs. "Yes, I know it's risky," Vivian whispered tensely. "But I have no choice. She found out, I'm sure of it. I see it in the way she looks at me, the indirect questions she asks. I can't let her tell Edward." A pause. Eleanor moved closer to the wall, trying to hear better. "The estate is perfect. It's isolated, no neighbors nearby, and the caretaker will only be there on Friday to prepare the house. After that, he leaves. We'll be completely alone on Saturday," Vivian continued, and there was a cold determination in her voice that made Eleanor tremble. "I'm not going to do anything to Lucas, obviously. He's still my son in Edward's eyes, but the old woman, she's a problem. If she opens her mouth, everything I've built over the last 8 years will come crashing down. I won't let that happen." The call ended. Eleanor stood frozen, leaning against the wall, trying to process what she had just heard. Vivian was planning something against her, something that would involve that weekend at the estate, far from everyone and everything. The anonymous message made sense now. Someone was trying to protect her, but who? Who else knew Vivian's secret? Who had an interest in protecting Eleanor? She thought about telling Edward everything immediately, but something stopped her. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought it was just the paranoia of an elderly woman? Vivian had 8 years of marriage, had built an impeccable image as a devoted wife. Edward was so detached from their domestic reality that he might not even notice the signs Eleanor saw so clearly. And there was Lucas. If the truth came out abruptly, the boy would be the most affected. He could be taken from Edward, sent to some institution while the legal issues of the irregular adoption were sorted out. He could lose the only father figure he knew, could be separated from the grandmother he loved so much. Eleanor spent Friday in a state of silent terror. She went about her normal activities, cooked with Lucas, talked to Edward when he came home from work, but her mind never stopped working. Should she pretend to be sick and not go to the estate? Should she tell Edward everything? Should she just pack her things and leave that house while there was still time? But every time she considered running, away she looked at Lucas. The boy had grown so attached to her. For the first time in his life, he had someone who loved him unconditionally, who spent time with him, who made him feel special. How could she abandon him now? On Friday night, as she put Lucas to bed, the boy held her hand tightly. "Is Grandma really going to the estate with us tomorrow?" he asked, his eyes full of hope. "I am, my love. I would never leave you alone." Eleanor kissed her grandson's forehead, feeling her heart ache. "I love you, Grandma," Lucas whispered before closing his eyes. "I love you too, my angel, more than you can imagine." She left the room with tears in her eyes. In the hallway, she found Vivian standing near the stairs. Her daughter-in-law was watching her with an indecipherable expression. "Ready for tomorrow, Eleanor?" Vivian asked, and there was something sinister in her seemingly casual tone. "Ready," Eleanor replied, lifting her chin and meeting her daughter-in-law's green eyes without looking away. "It's going to be an unforgettable weekend." Vivian smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of someone who had a plan that Eleanor was part of, whether she liked it or not. "Yes, it will be unforgettable indeed." Vivian descended the stairs slowly, and Eleanor stood there, watching her disappear downstairs. That night, for the last time before the trip, Eleanor received another message from the unknown number. This time it was more direct. "If you go, do not be alone with her at any time. Stay close to Edward or Lucas always, and do not accept anything she offers you to eat or drink. Trust me." Eleanor saved the number, typed a reply asking who it was, but the message failed to deliver. The number was blocked or out of service. She stared at her phone screen for long minutes, feeling fear and determination battle within her. If Vivian was planning something, Eleanor needed to be prepared. She needed to be alert to every move, every word, every opportunity. And above all, she needed to protect Lucas, that innocent boy who never asked to be part of this whole farce, who never deserved a mother who treated him like a piece in a game of self-interest. She got out of bed and went to the window, down. Below, the garden was plunged in darkness, only illuminated by the faint light from the street lamps. Everything seemed so peaceful, so normal. But Eleanor knew she was about to walk into a storm that could destroy everything, or that could finally bring the truth to light. She thought about her life, 72 years of struggles, sacrifices, and overcoming obstacles. She had raised a son alone, overcome poverty, faced widowhood with dignity. It wouldn't be now, so close to the end, that she would let someone like Vivian intimidate her. If she had to go to that estate, she would go. But she would go prepared, vigilant, determined to protect her grandson no matter the cost. And when it was all over, one way or another, the truth would be revealed. Because secrets as big as this one never stayed buried forever. On Saturday morning, the sun rose radiant over New York. It was a beautiful day, with a blue sky and pleasant temperature, the kind of perfect day for a trip to the countryside, for family moments, for creating happy memories. But as Eleanor placed her small suitcase in the trunk of the car, feeling Vivian's piercing gaze on her back, she knew that this weekend would be anything but happy. It would be the moment of truth. And the truth, when it finally emerges from the shadows, has the power to destroy or to liberate. She got into the car next to Lucas, who held her hand confidently. Edward drove animatedly, talking about the plans for the day, and Vivian, sitting in the passenger seat, looked out the window with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that Eleanor recognized as the prelude to something terrible that was about to happen. The drive to the estate took a little over 2 hours. They left New York City via the thruway, leaving behind the concrete and the hustle of the metropolis, heading towards the Hudson Valley. The landscape gradually changed, buildings giving way to fields, busy streets turning into roads lined with greenery. Lucas was fascinated, glued to the window, pointing at every cow, every horse, every different tree he saw. Eleanor tried to share her grandson's enthusiasm, but her heart was heavy with apprehension. She watched Vivian in the rearview mirror. Her daughter-in-law maintained a rigid posture, her shoulders tense, and fiddled with her phone with nervous movements. Edward, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air, hummed along with the radio and commented on how happy he was to finally take some time for the family. The estate was located on the outskirts of a small town in a region far from the main highway. They turned onto a dirt road that snaked between eucalyptus trees. After a few minutes, they arrived at a wooden gate that Edward opened with an old key. The property was large, with a colonial-style main house, a barn in the back, an artificial lake, and plenty of green space all around. The house was silent when they arrived. The caretaker had prepared everything as Edward had asked, opening windows, cleaning the rooms, and stocking the fridge, but he had already left as usual for the weekend. They were completely alone in that isolated piece of land. The house had a nostalgic air. Solid wood furniture, walls with faded floral wallpaper, a smell of mothballs mixed with mildew. Edward explained that the estate had belonged to Vivian's grandparents and that she had inherited it a few years ago. They hardly ever came here. The house was closed up. Most of the time, an abandoned property that no one had the heart to sell for sentimental reasons that Vivian never detailed. Lucas explored every corner with cautious curiosity. He wasn't one to get easily excited by new things, but there was something about the rustic nature of the place that attracted him. Eleanor followed him closely, never straying too far, always attentive to Vivian's movements. Edward proposed an outdoor lunch. They set up a table under the shade of a large mango tree in the front garden. The food the caretaker had left was simple, but tasty. Roast beef, stuffing, coleslaw, white rice. Lucas ate with an unusual appetite, excited by this different kind of picnic. Eleanor forced herself to eat, but each bite went down with difficulty. Vivian barely touched her food. She constantly checked her phone, checked the time, and her eyes wandered over the grounds as if searching for something or planning something. Edward didn't seem to notice his wife's strange behavior. He was too busy taking pictures of Lucas, trying to capture this rare moment of family togetherness. After lunch, Edward suggested they show Lucas the lake. It was an artificial pond that Vivian's grandfather had built decades ago, surrounded by bamboo and with a few wooden benches on the bank. They walked across the grounds, and Eleanor always stayed by Lucas's side, holding his hand firmly. The lake was beautiful, despite its neglect. The water was green and still, covered in some parts by water lilies. There were wild ducks swimming peacefully, and the sound of birds came from the surrounding trees. Lucas was enchanted, especially when a frog jumped very close to him. The boy crouched down to observe the animal up close, and Edward took the opportunity to take more pictures. It was at that moment that Edward's phone rang. It was an urgent call from work, a problem with an international contract that needed his immediate attention. He apologized and walked away to take the call, heading back towards the house while speaking in English to someone on the other end of the line. Vivian, Eleanor, and Lucas were left alone by the lake. The silence between the three generations was heavy, laden with unspoken tensions. Vivian watched her son playing with twigs on the bank, but her gaze was distant, lost in thoughts that Eleanor preferred not to imagine. "Lucas, why don't you go see if you can find more little frogs over there by those rocks?" Vivian suggested suddenly, pointing to a more secluded area. "Can I, Mommy?" The boy looked at his mother in surprise. It was unusual for her to suggest he explore something freely. "You can, but don't go too far." Vivian forced a smile. Lucas ran off towards the rocks, excited by the unexpected permission. Eleanor made a move to follow him, but Vivian stopped her with a touch on the arm. "Let him explore on his own for a bit. I need to talk. I need to you." Vivian's voice was low, controlled, but there was an underlying tension that was impossible to ignore. "About what?" Eleanor met her daughter-in-law's gaze. "You know what about?" Vivian released her mother-in-law's arm and crossed her own. "I've seen the way you've been looking at me for days. I heard you when you stopped on the veranda that afternoon. I know that you know." Eleanor felt her heart pound, but she kept her expression serene. "I don't know what you're talking about, Vivian. Don't insult me by feigning ignorance." Vivian took a step forward, and there was something dangerous in her green eyes. "You heard my conversation. You found out about Lucas. And now what do you want? To tell Edward and destroy this family? This family is already destroyed, Vivian. It's built on lies, Eleanor replied firmly. Edward deserves to know the truth. The truth? Vivian laughed, but it was a bitter, joyless laugh. And what truth would that be? That I gave him the family he always wanted. That Lucas has a present father, a comfortable life, opportunities he never would have had if he'd stayed with a teenage mother with no means. Do you think you'd be doing him a favor by telling? You deceived my son. You forged documents, lied about an entire pregnancy. That's a crime, Vivian. And more than that, it's an unforgivable betrayal. Eleanor tried to keep her voice low so as not to scare Lucas, who was a few yards away. A crime? Vivian moved closer. You know what's a crime? Taking a child from the only home he's ever known. Making a boy like Lucas, with all his particularities, go through the trauma of separation, be thrown into the system while legal battles drag on. Destroying the life of a good man like Edward, that would be a crime. Eleanor realized they were moving away from Lucas. Vivian was walking slowly, and she was following, always keeping her daughter-in-law in her line of sight. They were approaching the back of the property, where there was a more isolated area of bamboo groves. And what do you propose, then? That I stay quiet while you continue living this farce? While you use my son and my grandson for your own interests? Eleanor questioned. I propose that you think very carefully before making any decisions. Vivian stopped walking and turned to face her mother-in-law completely. Because once you open your mouth, there's no going back. Edward will hate me, he'll want to take everything from me, including Lucas. And you know who else will suffer from that? The boy. That sensitive boy who has finally found some stability in his life. Eleanor was about to reply when she saw something that made her freeze. Behind Vivian, among the bamboo, was an area of disturbed earth, an open ditch, rectangular, about 6 feet long and 3 feet deep. Next to it, a shovel leaned against a tree. Her blood ran cold. What is that? She asked, pointing to the ditch. Vivian turned to look and then faced her again with an expression that no longer tried to hide anything. It was pure, cold determination. It's a problem that needs to be solved, Vivian said with terrifying calm. In that moment, Eleanor understood everything. The sudden trip to the estate, Edward's insistence on coming, the caretaker who prepared everything and left, that ditch that was clearly not for landscaping as Vivian had claimed on the phone when she ordered it dug. It had all been planned. Vivian had manipulated Edward into bringing them here, to this isolated place where no one would hear, no one would see. You're insane. Eleanor took a step back. You won't get away with what you're thinking. I'm not insane. I'm being practical, Vivian advanced. You are a threat to everything I've built. I can't let you destroy my life. And Lucas? You think he won't miss me? That Edward won't suspect anything? Eleanor continued to back away, but Vivian followed her step for step. I'll say you felt unwell, that you had a sudden medical episode. These things happen to elderly people, and as for Lucas, he's a child, he'll get over it. Vivian was almost whispering now, as if sharing a secret. Eleanor looked around desperately. Where was Edward? Where was Lucas? She tried to scream, but Vivian was faster. She pushed her mother-in-law hard, causing her to stumble backward. Eleanor lost her balance and fell into the ditch, her back hitting the hard ground. The pain was intense. She tried to get up, but her arms were trembling, her legs wouldn't respond properly. Vivian picked up the shovel and began to throw dirt on her. Not much, just enough to keep her trapped there, unable to get out on her own. I'm sorry it has to be this way, Vivian said as she worked, and there were tears in her eyes now, but her hands didn't stop. But I have no choice. I'm not going to lose everything because of you. Eleanor tried to shield her face from the falling dirt. She spat, coughed, tried to move, but the weight of the earth held her more and more tightly. Desperation took over. She was going to die here, in this cold hole, far from everything she knew, without being able to say goodbye to Edward. Without being able to hug Lucas one last time. That's when she heard voices in the distance, shouts, running footsteps. Vivian stopped shoveling and looked back, startled. Edward emerged from the bamboo, running desperately, and behind him was another figure, a middle-aged woman whom Eleanor took a few seconds to recognize. It was Joanna, the maid who had worked at the mansion for years, the one who was always discreet and efficient, who seemed invisible, but saw everything. "Vivian, what are you doing?" Edward shouted in horror when he saw the scene. "My mother!" He ran to the ditch and jumped, in clearing the dirt off Eleanor with his hands, helping her sit up, checking if she was okay. His hands were shaking, his face was white with shock. Vivian remained paralyzed, holding the shovel, unable to react or flee. Joanna approached her and snatched the tool from her hands firmly. "Joanna, what are you—" Edward was confused, trying to process everything at once while helping his mother out of the ditch. "It was Lucas, Mr. Edward," Joanna said in a trembling voice. "He sent me a video. It showed her, Mrs. Vivian, shoveling dirt into the ditch. Earlier today, practicing. And there was audio too, her conversations on the phone planning all of this. He recorded everything and sent it to me, asking me to tell you. I tried to call, but you were busy on your work call, so I took my car and came as fast as I could." Edward looked at Vivian with an expression of pain and betrayal that was heartbreaking. "My God, Vivian, what have you done? Why?" Vivian began to cry. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of desperation from someone whose plans had crumbled. "I had to, Edward. She found out about Lucas. She was going to tell you everything. She was going to destroy our family." "About Lucas? What about my son?" Edward helped Eleanor sit on a nearby log and turned to his wife. And then it all came out. Between sobs and broken words, Vivian confessed. The fake pregnancy, the forged tests, the illegal adoption, everything. Every word was a stab to Edward's heart. He listened in silence, his face going through all the colors, from pale to the red of restrained anger. "So my son, the boy I raised, who I love, he's not—" "You lied about everything?" Edward struggled to form the sentences. "And you were going to try to kill my mother because of it?" "I wasn't going to kill her," Vivian tried to justify. "I was just going to make it look like it was natural. She's elderly, these things happen." "Are you listening to the absurdity you're saying?" Edward screamed, and it was the first time Eleanor had seen her son lose control like that. "You were going to bury my mother alive. How did I not see who you really are? How was I so blind?" Lucas appeared from between the bamboo at that moment, holding his tablet. He had seen everything, recorded everything with the device's camera. The boy approached slowly, his eyes full of tears, his small body trembling. "I'm sorry, Mommy," Lucas said softly, "but Grandma is my family. I had to protect her." Vivian looked at her son, at the boy she had never truly loved as a mother should, and something definitively broke on her face. She fell to her knees in the dirt, covering her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Edward took out his phone and called the police. As he spoke, he looked at his wife with a mixture of sadness and disgust. When he hung up, he approached Lucas and hugged the boy tightly. "You were so brave," Edward whispered to his son, "so brave and so smart. You saved Grandma." Lucas looked at Eleanor, who, though shaken and covered in dirt, smiled at her grandson through her tears. The boy let go of his father and ran into his grandmother's arms, burying his face in her lap. "I love you, Grandma. I wasn't going to let anything bad happen to you." The boy's words came out muffled, but they were filled with a pure and profound love. "I love you too, my angel. You're my hero." Eleanor stroked her grandson's hair, trying to control the tremor in her hands. The police arrived in less than 30 minutes. Vivian was taken away in handcuffs in a state of shock, repeating over and over that she wasn't a criminal, that she was just protecting what was hers. The officers asked questions, took photos of the scene, collected the recordings Lucas had made. Joanna told them everything she knew, how she had been suspicious of strange conversations for weeks, how she had seen Vivian acting suspiciously, how she decided to keep an eye out to protect the family she had served for years. Edward was in shock, sitting on the ground next to his mother and son, trying to process that his entire life for the past 8 years had been a lie. The son he loved was not biologically his. The woman he was married to had planned to kill his mother. Everything he believed to be true had crumbled in a matter of minutes. "Mom, forgive me." He held Eleanor's hand, his words coming out with difficulty. Forgive me for bringing you into this madness, for not seeing who she really was." "There's nothing to forgive, my son." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You had no way of knowing. She fooled everyone." "And Lucas?" Edward looked at the boy, who was quiet, hugging his grandmother. "He's not my biological son, but he's my son in every way that matters. How am I going to explain all this to him?" "With love and truth," Eleanor replied. "He's a very smart child. He will understand. And he will continue to love you because you are the only father. He knows the only one that matters." The sun was setting when they could finally leave the estate. The police had collected all the evidence, taken all the statements. Edward drove back to New York in silence, with Lucas sleeping in Eleanor's lap in the back seat and Joanna in the passenger seat. The city welcomed them with its lights and its motion, so different from the deceptive tranquility of the countryside. When they arrived at the mansion, the house felt different, bigger, emptier, laden with memories that now had a bitter taste. That night, after Lucas finally fell asleep, in Eleanor's room, as he didn't want to be alone, Edward and his mother talked in the kitchen. He drank strong coffee, trying to process everything, and she just held his hand, offering the silent comfort that only a mother can give. "I need to sort out Lucas's situation." Edward spoke more to himself than to her. "I need to adopt him officially, make sure he stays with me. I can't lose him too." "You won't lose him," Eleanor assured him. "Any judge will see that you are his father in every sense that matters. You've raised him since he was a baby, given him love, structure, security. Your bond is real. What if the biological family shows up? What if they want to take him?" Edward was afraid to even voice that thought. "We'll deal with that if it happens. But for now, your son needs you whole, present, showing him that nothing has changed in the love you feel for him." Eleanor spoke with the wisdom of someone who has lived a long time and learned that sometimes the only thing we can do is face one day at a time. Edward hugged his mother tightly as he hadn't since he was a child. "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for being here, for loving Lucas as you do, for surviving. Without you, I don't know what would have become of me. We are a family, my son, and family protects each other, always." Eleanor caressed her son's back, feeling the weight of the last few days finally fall upon her. But they had survived, they had protected each other, and together they would find a way to move forward. The days that followed the episode at the estate were the hardest Eleanor had ever faced in her 72 years. She would wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares, reliving the moment the dirt fell on her face, feeling again the desperation of being trapped in that cold hole. Her body ached from the bruises of the fall. Her hands trembled for no apparent reason, and there were moments when a sudden anguish would overwhelm her, making her heart race and her chest tighten. Edward, noticing his mother's suffering, immediately arranged for psychological support. A therapist specializing in trauma began to visit Eleanor 3 times a week at the mansion. They were difficult sessions where she had to relive the event to process it, where she learned breathing techniques to control the panic, and where, little by little, she began to rebuild her sense of security. Lucas was also receiving support. The boy, despite being brave at the crucial moment, carried an enormous guilt for having reported his own mother. Edward spent hours talking with his son, explaining that he had done the right thing, that protecting those we love is never wrong, that being loyal to the truth is more important than keeping dangerous secrets. But there were nights when Lucas would cry softly into his pillow, asking if his mother hated him now, if he was a bad child for sending that video. At the police station, Vivian made a full confession. Perhaps it was the shock, perhaps the realization that there was no turning back, but she told them everything in minute detail. She revealed how she had met a lawyer who dealt with irregular adoptions, how she had paid a significant sum to get a newborn baby, how for 9 months she had worn strategic clothing and prosthetic bellies, how she had forged every medical test by paying corrupt professionals. She told them about Lucas's biological mother, a 17-year-old girl from a small town who had become pregnant with no means to raise the child. The most shocking part was when she admitted that she had never felt the love for the boy that a mother should feel. From the beginning, Lucas had been just a tool to maintain her marriage to Edward, to secure her social and financial position. When she realized the boy had some developmental particularities, instead of seeking help with love and dedication, she felt frustrated as if she had made a bad deal. Her words, recorded in the official statement, were of a coldness that horrified everyone. As for the plan to eliminate Eleanor, Vivian explained that she had begun to suspect her mother-in-law knew the secret a few weeks prior. She wasn't sure, but the way Eleanor looked at her, the subtle questions she asked, had put her on alert. When she heard about the trip to the estate, she saw an opportunity. She called the caretaker and told him to dig a ditch at the back of the property, using the excuse of a future landscaping project. Her plan was to make it seem as if Eleanor had suffered a sudden medical episode, bury her quickly, and then feign despair when the body was found days later. The prosecutor on the case, a 50-year-old man with decades of experience, told Edward he had never seen a case of manipulation and attempted crime so meticulously planned. Vivian would be charged with identity fraud, forgery of documents, illegal adoption, and attempted murder. The sentence could be more than 20 years in prison. Edward plunged into a complex legal process to regularize Lucas's situation. He hired the best family law attorneys in New York. The first task was to find the boy's biological mother. With the information provided by Vivian, they located the young woman, who was now 25, married, and had 2 young children. When they learned of the case, she and her husband came to New York. The meeting was tense and emotional. The young woman, named Carla, cried a lot when she saw Lucas. She said she had never wanted to give up the baby, but her family had pressured her. She was too young and had no way to raise a child alone. She said she thought about him every day, wondered if he was okay, if he was happy. But after talking with Edward, seeing the deep bond between father and son, and understanding that Lucas had specific needs that were being met with love and dedication, she made a mature and generous decision. Carla signed all the necessary documents, permanently relinquishing her rights to Lucas. She said she saw it not as abandonment, but as an act of love, allowing the boy to remain in the only family he had ever known, with the only father that mattered. She only asked that one day when Lucas was older and ready, he could meet her and hear her story, not to reclaim him, but so he would know where he came from. With this official relinquishment and the history of Edward raising Lucas from birth, the formal adoption process was relatively quick. 6 months after that terrible afternoon at the estate, Edward received Lucas's new birth certificate, which officially listed him as the father. He cried as he read the document, not because of the legal formality, but because it represented the confirmation of something he had always known in his heart. Lucas was his son in every sense that truly mattered. During these months of transition, Eleanor was fundamental in maintaining the family's emotional structure. Despite her own trauma, she dedicated herself entirely to caring for Lucas and supporting Edward. Her mornings in the kitchen with her grandson continued, now with even more meaning. There, between recipes and conversations about dinosaurs, they built a sense of normalcy, created a comforting routine that helped them move forward. Joanna was promoted to house manager, with a significantly higher salary and Edward's eternal gratitude. She revealed that she had been suspicious of Vivian for years, that she saw how her employer treated Lucas with indifference, and how there were inconsistencies in her stories about the pregnancy. But she had never had concrete proof, only intuition. When Lucas began to trust her, sharing his anxieties about feeling unloved by his mother, Joanna started paying even closer attention. It was she who suggested to the boy that if he ever saw or heard anything worrying, he could record it and show it to someone he trusted. Lucas developed a special bond with Joanna. She became a kind of surrogate mother figure, someone who showed genuine affection without the expectations and complexities that usually accompany family relationships. The boy flourished with all that attention in an environment where he could finally be himself without fear of judgment. Eleanor's therapy began to show results. The nightmares decreased in frequency, the panic attacks became more spaced out, and she began to regain her taste for the small things that used to give her pleasure. Cooking, tending to the orchids, reading before bed, talking with Edward about life. The therapist explained that traumas of this magnitude leave permanent marks. but it was possible to learn to live with them, to integrate them into one's own story without letting them define who she was. Edward was also in therapy. He needed to process the betrayal, the manipulation, the 8 years of marriage that he now realized were based on lies. He needed to forgive himself for not noticing, for being so absent that he allowed this situation to develop under his nose. And above all, he needed to learn to trust again, to believe that not all people were like Vivian, that there was still goodness and truth in the world. It was during one of these therapy sessions that Edward had a revelation. He was talking to the psychologist about feeling useless, about wanting to do something meaningful with all that pain, about transforming suffering into something positive. And then he remembered Lucas, how the boy had a brilliant but different mind, how society often didn't know how to deal with neurodivergent children, how many families faced similar challenges without adequate support. He decided to create an institute dedicated to neurodivergent children and young people and their families. It would be a place that offered therapeutic support, specialized education, support groups for parents, and above all, a welcoming environment where every child could be respected for their particularities. Edward sold one of the smaller companies in his portfolio and invested the entire amount in creating the institute. He named it the Lucas Institute in honor of the son who had taught him so much about unconditional love, courage, and resilience. The construction of the institute took almost a year. Edward was personally involved in every detail, from choosing the land in an accessible New York neighborhood to hiring specialized professionals. Eleanor, seeing the project take shape, offered to be part of the team. She would be the director of family outreach, responsible for welcoming families, listening to their stories, offering the comfort that only someone who has gone through real difficulties can give. The estate where she had almost lost her life also underwent a transformation. Edward decided not to sell the property, but to give it new meaning. He hired landscapers and renovated the entire area. The ditch where Eleanor had almost been buried was filled in, and a beautiful fountain surrounded by gardens was built over it. They installed wooden benches around it, planted colorful flowers, and created a space for contemplation and peace. It was a memorial not of the horror that almost happened, but of overcoming, of life that had conquered death, of hope that had sprung from the earth. Lucas participated in the project to give the estate new meaning. He helped choose the flowers, suggested putting up a plaque with an inspiring phrase near the fountain, and even designed a small playground that was built next to the house. The boy was learning that places, like people, could change, could be transformed by intention and love. 6 months after the inauguration of the Lucas Institute, when everything seemed to have finally stabilized, Eleanor received a letter. The envelope arrived by mail, with no return address, only the postmark of the women's prison where Vivian was being held. Inside there was a handwritten letter in shaky script, and another smaller sealed letter addressed to Lucas. Eleanor read the letter intended for her with a heavy heart. Vivian wrote, asking for forgiveness. She said she had spent the last few months in deep reflection, had undergone intensive therapy in prison, and had finally begun to understand the gravity of what she had done. She acknowledged that there was no excuse for her actions, that she had manipulated Edward, used Lucas, and tried to take Eleanor's life out, of pure selfishness and fear. She asked not for absolution, as she knew she didn't deserve it, but only that one day, somehow, they could understand that she was sick in her soul, consumed by an ambition and an inner emptiness that led her to do unforgivable things. The letter for Lucas, as Vivian explained, was to be given to him when he was older, when he could understand. It was an explanation, an apology from a mother to a son, or from the woman who should have been a mother but never could be. Eleanor showed the letter to Edward. They talked for a long time about what to do. After much thought, Edward put the letter for Lucas in a safe to be given to him when the boy turned 18. As for Vivian's request for forgiveness, they each dealt with it in their own way. Edward felt a mixture of anger and pity and was not ready to forgive. Eleanor, on the other hand, felt something different. She decided to visit Vivian in prison. She didn't tell anyone in the family. She went alone, on a Saturday morning, accompanied only by Joanna, who insisted on driving her. The women's prison was on the outskirts of New York. a grey, intimidating building surrounded by high walls and fences. The process of being searched and entering was humiliating and tiring, but Eleanor persevered. When they finally took her to the visiting room and Vivian entered, Eleanor barely recognized her daughter-in-law. The sophisticated woman with impeccable hair and designer clothes had been replaced by a thin figure with dull hair tied in a loose ponytail, wearing an orange prison uniform. Vivian had deep dark circles under her eyes. Her skin was lifeless, and when her eyes met Eleanor's, she immediately began to cry. They sat across from each other, separated by a plastic table, with a guard watching from a distance. For long minutes, neither of them spoke. Vivian cried softly, her hands trembling on the table. Eleanor just watched, trying to feel what her heart was telling her. "I'm so sorry," Vivian finally whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the lie, for the manipulation, for almost taking your life. There are no words that can express how much I regret it." "Why did you do all of it, Vivian?" Eleanor asked calmly. "You had everything. A good husband, a beautiful house, money. Why did you need to lie?" "Because I was empty." Vivian wiped away her tears with the back of her hand. "I grew up in a wealthy family, but without love. I learned from an early age that people are worth what they have, not who they are. When I met Edward, I saw in him not just a rich man, but someone who wanted a family, tradition. I knew he would never marry me if I couldn't give him a child. So I created this farce. And Lucas, did you ever love him?" Eleanor's question was genuine, without judgment. "I tried," Vivian sobbed. "I swear I tried, but there was nothing in me. It's as if the ability to love had died a long time ago. I would look at that boy and see only another lie I had to maintain, another responsibility. I could never see him as my real son." "And now?" "What do you feel now?" Eleanor pressed. "Regret, shame, and a strange, belated love for Lucas, now that I've lost him forever." Vivian looked directly into her mother-in-law's eyes. "Did you come here to hear my apologies or to tell me how terrible I am?" "I came to tell you that I forgive you." Eleanor's words came out with a quiet firmness. "Not because you deserve it, but because I need to. I need to let go of this anger, this fear. I need to move on without carrying the weight of hatred." Vivian fell silent, processing those words. "How can you forgive me after what I tried to do?" "Because holding a grudge would only hurt me more. Because life has taught me that forgiveness isn't about releasing the one who hurt us. It's about freeing ourselves from the emotional prison we create when we can't let go." Eleanor spoke with the wisdom of a long life. "And because, looking at you now, I see only a broken woman who made terrible decisions and will pay for them for the rest of her life." "Thank you," Vivian whispered, "even though I don't deserve it. Thank you." The visit ended shortly after. Eleanor stood up, nodded, and left that place. When she returned to the car where Joanna was waiting, she felt something different. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't complete relief, but it was a step towards inner peace. She had forgiven not because Vivian had changed or redeemed herself, but because she herself needed to be free. The following months brought a new, lighter routine. The Lucas Institute thrived, serving dozens of families, transforming lives. Eleanor found purpose in her work there, talking to scared parents, hugging children who felt different, offering the wisdom of someone who understood that love and acceptance were the greatest transformative forces. Lucas continued to flourish. He made some friends at the Institute, other children who understood his unique way of seeing the world. His grades improved, his confidence grew, and little by little, he began to verbalize his feelings more clearly. There were still difficult days, moments when he asked about his mother, but Edward and Eleanor always responded with loving honesty, explaining that Vivian had made bad choices, but that it didn't diminish his value in any way. Edward, for his part, found a new balance between work and family. He reduced his hours, delegated more responsibilities, and prioritized being present. He had dinner with his family every night, spent weekends with Lucas, and actively participated in the Institute's activities. He still carried the scars of betrayal, still had difficulty trusting completely, but he was learning that vulnerability was not weakness, but courage. A year and a half after that terrible afternoon at the estate, Edward organized a small ceremony at the memorial he had built where the ditch had been. Only close family, Eleanor, Lucas, Joanna, and a few intimate friends were present. He had a bronze plaque made to be fixed near the fountain. The plaque read, "Where there was almost an end, life blossomed. May this place be an eternal reminder that love always wins." Lucas read a short text he had written about courage, about protecting those we love, about transforming pain into beauty. His voice was firm, his eyes shining with intelligence and sensitivity. Eleanor cried with emotion as she listened to her grandson, realizing how much he had grown, how much he had matured through everything they had experienced. After the ceremony, when everyone gathered at the renovated estate house for lunch, Edward made a toast. He held up his glass of juice, as he had stopped drinking alcohol to be an example for his son, and said, "To our family, not the one determined by blood, but the one built by love. To my mother, who survived and taught us about resilience. To my son, who showed us the meaning of courage, and to everyone here today, who proved that family is who stands by our side in difficult times." Everyone toasted, and at that moment, under the afternoon sun that illuminated the place that had witnessed so much horror, but now breathed peace, each of them felt something special. They felt they had crossed the darkest valley and emerged on the other side, not just as survivors, but transformed, stronger, more connected. Eleanor looked around, saw her son smiling genuinely for the first time in a long time, saw her grandson running through the garden with other children, saw Joanna chatting animatedly with the guests, and felt a deep gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, for having had the chance to know Lucas, for having been part of this journey of transformation. That night, when they returned to New York and Lucas was already asleep, Edward and Eleanor sat on the mansion's veranda. They watched the city lights below, millions of lives happening simultaneously, each with its own battles and victories. "Mom, I was thinking," Edward broke the silence, "about everything that happened, about how life prepares us for things we never imagined facing, and I realized that as terrible as it was, it brought us something precious." "What is that, my son?" "It brought us truth. We were living in a comfortable lie, and now we live in a difficult but real truth. And that truth, as painful as it is better than any beautiful lie." Edward looked at his mother. "And it brought you back to me. I realized how much I had pushed you away from my life all these years, how much I let work consume me. I almost lost you in a horrific way, and that woke me up. Son, you never lost me. I was always here, I always will be." Eleanor held his hand. "And about Lucas, he is your son. Not by genes, but by love, by dedication, for every sleepless night when he was sick, for every victory you celebrated together. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by choice and commitment. I know, and I choose him every day. I choose you. I choose this family we've built from the ashes of a lie." Edward squeezed his mother's hand. "Thank you, Mom, for everything." They sat, their mother and son, in comfortable silence as the city pulsed below and the stars shone above. They had been through hell and survived. More than that, they had transformed the experience into something greater, into a legacy of love, courage, and redemption. Lucas would grow up knowing his true story, knowing his origins, but always certain of who his real family was. The Lucas Institute would continue to help hundreds of children and families, spreading the message that different is not less, it is just unique. The estate that had almost been the scene of a tragedy would be a place of celebration and renewal. And Eleanor, the matriarch who had almost been buried by injustice, became a living symbol that even when they try to bury us, we can bloom again. The story that began with deceit and almost ended in horror transformed into something greater. It became a testament that the truth, however painful, is always worth it. That true love is not built on lies, but on genuine acceptance. That family is not about biology, but about commitment, about being present, about choosing each other every day. Vivian would serve her sentence, carrying the weight of her choices. Perhaps one day she would find true redemption, perhaps not. but her story served as a harsh lesson on how ambition and inner emptiness can lead us to the darkest places of the human soul. And Eleanor, at 73, discovered that life still had much to offer, that even after nearly losing everything, it was possible to rebuild. That courage was not in never feeling fear, but in continuing despite it. That forgiveness was more about freeing oneself than absolving the other, and that love, true and unconditional love, had the power to transform even the deepest wounds into scars that told stories of overcoming. The family that Edward, Eleanor, and Lucas formed was not perfect. It had its scars, its traumas, its difficult days. But it was real, it was honest, it was built on a solid foundation of truth and love. And that, in the end, was all that really mattered. Because when the earth tries to swallow us, when darkness threatens to consume us, it is love that pulls us back into the light. It is family, true and chosen, that gives us the strength to breathe again. And it is the courage to face the truth, however frightening, that sets us free to live fully. The story of Eleanor, Edward, and Lucas was about that. About almost losing everything and discovering what truly matters. About being buried by injustice and choosing to blossom anyway. About transforming pain into purpose, trauma into legacy, and lies into liberating truth. And so, under the starry New York sky, as the city slept and dreamed, that family found its peace. Not the peace of those who have never suffered, but the peace of those who have survived, learned, and chosen to transform their story into something bigger than themselves. A legacy of love that would continue to echo through the Lucas Institute, through the transformed lives, through every child who would find there a place of acceptance and hope. Because in the end, that's what life is about. Not avoiding the storms, but learning to dance in the rain, not never falling, but always having the courage to get up, and not never being buried, but always finding the strength to breathe again, to bloom again, to live again. And Eleanor, with her wisdom and resilience, would always remember that even when the earth tries to cover us, when they try to silence us, when they want to bury us, we can choose to sprout again, because life, true life, always finds a way. Always. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor, Edward, and Lucas has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of courage, redemption, and true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. This story reminds us that family is not defined by blood, but by choice and unconditional love, and that even in the darkest situations, we can find light and purpose. Every day we bring intense and transformative stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and most resilient side of the human soul. Share it with those you love, and we'll see you in the next episode with another narrative that will stir your emotions. We'll be waiting for you here, always.